Good morning and happy Father's Day to those of you here in our sanctuary and to those of you viewing us online. I'm Charles Thomas. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Flint. We are a progressive community in which people are free to be themselves without fear. If you would like more information about Unitarian Universalism or our congregation, please feel free to talk with one of our ministers. Their contact information can be found on the website at uuflint.org. If you are a visitor today and would like to receive our weekly email newsletter, just fill out one of the information cards you will find in the seat backs or register at our website. Please be sure to read the announcements on the back of your order of service, and one special announcement which appears on the slide. Please be sure to see your email for your ballot for Second Sunday donations. You simply hit reply to your email, do that first, and then mark your choices for the coming church year. When I was filling out mine, I didn't hit reply. I tried to fill it out and nothing happened, and I said, well, what's wrong here? And then I hit reply, and then I was able to actually fill it out. So you'll have similar success if you follow those steps. Once you fill it out, of course, send it. You'll have until the end of this week to reply. Contact the office if you have questions. Note that the deadline is Friday of this week, June 23rd, not Saturday, June 17th, yesterday, as was incorrectly stated in the June 16th e-update that you received. So the real deadline was not yesterday, it's this coming Friday, June 23rd, for turning in your Second Sunday donations ballot. We will have our chalice lighting. I invite one of our co-ministers, Jerry, to come forward. We'll now light our chalice. For all the moments and all the meaning and the role of a lifetime, we light our chalice for fathers and for fatherhood. Now, if you would, please join me in reciting our covenant, as you see on the screen. Recognizing the richness of diversity, the beauty and wonder of shared worship, and the transforming power of love and service, we gather as a sacred, intentional community to freely seek knowledge and truth, to celebrate the fullness of life, and by our actions to increase goodness and justice.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Long, long way from home. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost done. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost done, yeah. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost done. Long way from home. from home.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Here, may you find a warm greeting, a kind word, a gentle touch. Sometimes I feel like I have no friend. Here, may you find community of support, a pulse of liberation, a vision of hope. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Here, may you find a song to sing, a moment of silence, and a hand to hold. Even when you are a long way from home, may these walls give you shelter. May this community break through your loneliness, and may you feel the embrace of a larger spirit of life and of love.
Stand if you love anymore. It's completely up to you. Be seated.
After our words for meditation this morning and our time of silence, you'll be invited to come forward and light a candle of joy or concern if you like. And you can do that at the back of the sanctuary as well, where you can also, if you choose to do so, write out your joy of concern in one of the books back there, and we'll make sure it gets into our weekly e-newsletter, the e-update. On this Father's Day, we recognize the vast spectrum of experience and the often complicated feelings that surround such a holiday. We honor those fathers and father figures in our lives who have loved, supported, encouraged, and instructed us, and we seek to share these gifts with others. We mourn with those who have lost fathers, and those fathers who have lost a child. We offer support to those for whom this day brings pain and sorrow. We support and celebrate the fathers in our midst who give of themselves to their children, recognizing all the strength and wisdom that fatherhood requires. We support those men who choose not to have children, yet who represent the loving and supporting ways to children. Yes, fatherhood can be complicated, and today, let us honor it. Let us enjoy the silence. Amen.
here. I guess we should have talked about this.
Number 1, please stand and remain standing until we're all done reading. And we'll call your number as well. Just those of you who have a number, when we call your number, then you will stand.
Yeah,
until we call your number, you can relax. Yeah. Yeah. Number 1, you represent the first generation of West African people who were enslaved and brought to Jamestown in the year 1619, arriving even before the Pilgrims came to Plymouth Rock.
2, you represent the children of those people born between 1625 and 1650. You remain enslaved alongside others as slave trading develops.
3.
3. I know I gave out 3.
We know we had a 3. Imagine a 3. There we go. That's yes.
You represent the children's children of those Jamestown slaves born between 1650 and 1675, and you remain enslaved throughout the colonies in both North and South.
Number 4, you represent the children's children's children of those Jamestown slaves and were born between 1675 and 1700, the 4th generation to be enslaved. Slave owners now decide they should convert their slaves to Christianity.
5, you represent the 5th generation of those Jamestown slaves and were born between 1700 and 1725. 100 years have passed since enslaved Africans were brought to Jamestown. Many more European Anglos have arrived and continue to claim the land as their own. Certain cities and towns are centers of great wealth, in part because you remain enslaved.
6, you represent the 6th generation born between 1725 and 1750. Many indigenous Native Americans have been driven out to make way for the expanding population in these British colonies, but you are still here and still enslaved.
Number 7. Imagine a 7. Perhaps someone who doesn't have a number. Number 7? Someone who doesn't have a... Very good, thanks. Number 7, you represent the 7th generation, born between 1750 and 1775. The colonies have begun to push for independence, stating that all men are created equal. That claim does not include you, since you are still enslaved.
8, you represent the 8th generation born between 1775 and 1800. The British colonies are now the United States. Some enslaved people from northern towns were even forced to fight in the American Revolution. The early presidents include enslavers. Thousands more West African people arrive here in chains. You remain enslaved.
9, you represent the 9th generation and were born between 1800 and 1825. 200 years have passed since the settlement at Jamestown. This country's population is booming. Textile mills in the north demand more cotton and make more profits for privileged owners, so farmers in the south, with free labor, grow more and more cotton and thus need more and more slaves. As enslaved people continue to arrive, you too remained enslaved.
10, you were born between 1825 and 1850 and represent the 10th generation. Native Americans are forced from their land. Many die or are slaughtered. There are now groups of people writing and speaking against slavery, and yet you remain enslaved. 14% of America's population are enslaved African Americans.
11, you represent the 11th generation of the Jamestown slaves and were born between 1850 and 1875. The country has fought a civil war, and after 244 years, slavery has officially ended. You are emancipated. You are the 11th generation to live here, but the first to do so out from under the specter of slavery. You are poor, uneducated. Many people in the North and South are working hard to limit your rights.
12. You represent the 12th generation, born between 1875 and 1900. After a brief period of empowerment, the Supreme Court has now ruled that separate is not only permissible, it is necessary. You are no longer a slave, but the law says you have fewer rights and privileges than white people.
13. 300 years have passed since your ancestors were brought to Jamestown in chains. You represent the 13th generation born between 1900 and 1925. That NAACP comes into existence. A world war is fought with black soldiers amongst the U.S. troops. They return home to intense oppression. Lynchings take place from Maine to California. A black migration from south to north fosters new forms of segregation and exclusion in northern cities. Your children attend schools that are clearly inferior.
14. You represent the 14th generation and were born between 1925 and 1950. The country suffers the Great Depression and fights in the Second World War, just as in the rest of society. People of color in the Army are kept separate from white people. Whole towns full of new homes are built after the war for the returning soldiers. People of color are not allowed to live in those towns.
15. You represent the children born between 1950 and 1975, the 15th generation. You witnessed Brown versus Board of Education, the Montgomery bus boycott, the March on Washington, Selma, civil rights legislation, and Martin and Malcolm. Cities north and south continue to fight vigorously against school desegregation.
16. Do we have a 16?
Yeah, they're
Very
discussing back there.
You represent the children born between 1975 and the year 2000. There's a Black Power movement and the declaration that black is beautiful. School integration is finally the practice in the whole land for your 16th generation, but housing is still woefully segregated in cities north and south.
17. Over 400 years have passed since your forebears arrived on this continent in 1619. You represent the 17th generation born since the year 2000. You are the great, 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 great grandchildren of your Jamestown ancestors. We have had an African American president, but we have an astounding incarceration rate for African Americans in what some call the new Jim Crow. We have blacks in positions of authority locally and nationally, but we still question if everyone believes that black lives really matter. Scientific research proves that police often arrest and jail black Americans for crimes that white people do with impunity. You may be seated.
Feel free to sing along. Paul and Silas bound in jail, had no money for to go their bail. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on. hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on. The very moment I thought I was lost, the dungeon shook and the chains fell off. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on. The only thing that we did wrong was staying in the wilderness too long. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on. The only thing that we did right was the day we begun to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on.
Get situated here. Okay. That's still not good. Okay. The enslaved people of Galveston, Texas, who were claimed as property by the mayor of the city, were no doubt doing what they did every other day on June 19th, 1865. Some were working at the pier, or maybe one of the many buildings that were owned by John Seabrook Sidner, the owner of the largest slave auction house west of the Mississippi. They probably knew this day was coming. Still, seeing Union officers riding towards them must have been a sight. In the Confederate States, nothing had changed in the 901 days that had passed since President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation had outlawed slavery. But as the Union began winning more and more battles toward the end of the Civil War, plantation owners in the Deep South began to worry about their property. They started to transfer their slaves into Texas, which was the largest and most western succession state, to avoid the encroaching enemy. Most of the territory was safe from Union troops up until what would prove to be one of the most important days in African American history. Juneteenth has been understandably simplified and romanticized as a moment in time when enslaved people were suddenly set free. They rejoiced in the streets and immediately began new lives. That was not the reality. But what played out was just as dramatic. First, it wasn't really a single moment. As a bustling port city with frequent travelers in and out from all over the country, it would be likely that the news of the Emancipation Proclamation had already reached Galveston way before Union troops had arrived. And secondly, a month Before Juneteenth, 30,000 Union U.S. colored troops had been transferred to Brownsville, Texas, to occupy the Texas border in Mexico. A storm forced them to drop anchor on June 18th in Galveston Bay for 2 days. Although they were offshore, it's hard to believe that a message that impending freedom was coming would not have reached that island. Had all of this failed, however, it is true that on June 19th, 2,000 Union troops led by General Gordon Granger arrived to issue what was called General Orders Number 3. It read, "The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free." In this, there is no dispute. But how number 3 was delivered is a whole other story. It has been naturally mythologized in an almost biblical way. It's a classic drama of the captive set free by the hero, General Granger. He was a larger-than-life figure who was said to have never disliked a man without showing them. Now, given the huge celebrations that Juneteenth currently inspires, one might assume that what transpired was an almost magical, or at least an idyllic scene that day. White Union troops riding into the center of Galveston, making a grand public announcement from that hero upon a steed, perhaps. Well, unfortunately, the day did not unfold so simply, nor without violence. In fact, General Granger found a suitable building to set up headquarters, signed the orders, which you see on the picture, and then he posted them. Then he directed some of his soldiers to ride out into the countryside to notify slave owners that their slaves were now free. They were also to tell the newly freed people to remain quietly where they were and work for wages, and by no means were they to attempt to come to army posts for protection. For the newly freed people, freedom sounded a lot like their former lives. That is, for those that knew that they were free. Because, as you might imagine, there were plenty of owners who were reticent to let their enslaved workers just walk off the plantations. In addition, at this time, there were 300,000 enslaved Black people in Texas alone. So it would take a little time for those soldiers to get to everybody. That and widespread fear of retaliation on both the sides of the whites and the Blacks also hindered notification. Now today, Juneteenth is a cause for a party. But in 1865, the modest and mostly private celebrations were also accompanied by apprehension and, in some cases, terror. Some owners vowed to kill anyone who left. Black people that tried to negotiate for wages were whipped. It was even recorded that a few plantation owners gave their slaves water laced with rat poison rather than to see them let go. And the general, an imperfect messenger of the good news, did not help matters. He issued curfews, he outlawed public gatherings, and he required travel passes. He also turned a blind eye as slavers were putting people on boats to Brazil and to Cuba, where slavery was still legal. Fake news, yes, fake newspaper articles reported that the law had been rescinded, and it created a lot of confusion. More than 500 deaths of free black people were reported within the first year in Texas alone. Nonetheless, on January 2nd of 1866, Galveston held an emancipation celebration, and nearly 1,000 free people processed through the town. They read the Emancipation Proclamation, they sang John Brown's Body, and ever since, there has been a celebration. And of course, they've been held throughout the United States. Red food and decorations are present because they symbolize resilience and the bloodshed during slavery. And although these are very joyous events, there is also the somber recognition of the horrible lives and deaths of millions. June 19th brought jubilation among the enslaved people, but it marked only the beginning of a long struggle that continues today. Now, the historical record has varied about that first June 19th, but the one thing that has pretty much remained consistent is that most African Americans felt that Juneteenth should be a national holiday. Now, it is a time to commemorate the end of slavery, but it is also a recognition by the entire country that the fight has not ended. All of America's eyes should be on the prize. Even before 1865, Black Americans questioned when their history and culture would be celebrated. In a famous 1852 speech, which you may be familiar with, Frederick Douglass, a former enslaved Black man, said, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. With all your religious parade and solemnity are to him mere fraud, deception, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. This 4th of July is yours, not mine," Douglass continued. "You may rejoice. I must mourn." So for 156 years, no national holiday marked the end of our nation's disgrace. As difficult and violent as June 19th was in 1865, the importance of it and pride in it kept native Texan Opal Lee to remember it and fight for it. Whether despite of or because of her memory of a Juneteenth when she was 12 years old, she fought hard. A mob of 500 people gathered outside her family's Fort Worth home in a predominantly white neighborhood, and they demanded that her family leave. Her family did run, and they burned down her house. As an adult and activist, she decided to make Juneteenth her mission. In 2016, she walked from her home to Washington, D.C., walking a symbolic 2.5 miles every day, which symbolized the 2.5 years between the proclamation and Juneteenth. Now, her walk did draw attention, but it was not until George Floyd's murder that the entire nation rallied behind her dream. 94-year-old Lee was present as President Biden signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act in 2021. 169 years after Frederick Douglass demanded a holiday for his people, the step was taken. One step in many that we can take in healing the open wounds of our long history of what Frederick Douglass called gross injustice.
I think everything a person needs to know about the human struggle for freedom and about those who would deny that freedom to others is in the story of Juneteenth. As I'm fond of reminding everyone, the word holiday originally meant holy day. And this new national holy day is a story of endurance and triumph that is certainly a story with a holy message. In a country where many people want to forget how America horribly mistreated and continues to mistreat Black Americans, we need this holy day, this story of Juneteenth. The story began soon after enslaved Africans were brought to North America, and slave owners started wondering, should we teach these Africans about Christianity? Some said no, and this was a hot debate. Many said no, that makes no sense. They are not human, and therefore cannot be saved. But other slave owners thought that Christianizing these black people would make them work harder and be more obedient. After all, the Bible would teach them, as it says in 1 Corinthians, let each of you remain in the condition in which you were called to Christianity. Were you a slave when called? Don't be concerned about it. In other words, stay in your place was the Apostle Paul's idea. Then, bishops and clergymen who wanted to count more converts presented Christianity as a handy slave control device, saying that it would give them a sense of duty to God and an expectation of going to heaven if they were good. The Bible does in many places make slavery sound like a normal part of life. The Apostle Paul didn't say, don't have slaves. He just said, treat your slaves fairly. But as the many decades passed, the enslaved people saw there was another, more powerful message in the Bible. And it was about God's compassion for the captive. The message was in the form of a dramatic story, largely in the book of Exodus, about the enslaved Israelites who suffered terribly. In Exodus it reads, "Look," said the Pharaoh to his people, "the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country." So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. Now, can you imagine slaves doing back-breaking labor, sun up to sundown, in the oven-like heat of the American South, and then in the few precious hours they were allowed to do church, hearing that story from the Bible? The slave drivers had unwittingly, given their captives a story, a mythology that would help them endure and fight against their savage, inhumane treatment. And this story of God's favor for the downtrodden and the captive is not just a Jewish story or a Christian story. It is, as many of us now know, a universal myth that has led many a human being to fight for injustice in the face of tyranny. You see, the passages in the Bible that condone slavery, they're just philosophical musings and opinions of an ancient culture meant to justify their own selfish desires and customs. But the dreamlike story of slaves escaping their hated masters to win the freedom that every human knows they deserve, that is a different kind of story. That is a story that comes from the spirit, the heart, the gut. It is inner spiritual wisdom and the beginning of the escape story that ends with a Liberation Day story, the story of Juneteenth. And it's well documented that enslaved blacks did their own intuitive biblical criticism and knew enough to discount parts of the Bible they sensed were cultural artifacts, ideas that were not inspired by any good God. The esteemed scholar and guru of the study of slave religion, Albert Rabbitoe, tells of the well-known belief among slaves that somewhere there was a real Bible from God. This real Bible was different from their master's Bible that so conveniently said, "Slaves, obey your master." This kind of higher criticism of the Bible would come much later from universities in Europe and would indeed show that the Bible was constructed of many parts, and those parts were not created equal. Meanwhile, throughout our nation, other people were also becoming part of the story of Juneteenth. Lynn showed that the story of this holy day makes much of a soldier, a warrior who showed up and said with authority, "It's over. Your long struggle is finally over." You can see the mythologization here in a good sense of what happens with this kind of complicated story. Things are reduced to players so that the message can be propagated down through history. And the general, like a messenger from God, this man from the north represented a powerful people who were also reading God's Bible, the Bible that knows slavery of any type can never be justified. The pro-slavery churchmen of the South had been defending slavery for generations, using, of course, what slaves correctly called the Master's Bible. They quoted Paul mainly and other sources that said slavery's normal, just part of God's plan. But abolitionists everywhere found in the Bible the stories from the Psalms and from Isaiah and the other prophets who spoke of fighting injustice and freedom for the captives. But mainly, the abolitionists found and used the story of God delivering the Israelites from bondage. The abolitionists, black and white, were using the same story that gave power and hope to the enslaved black people in the South. Pennsylvania was the first state to end slavery in 1780 and was followed shortly by Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. New York and New Jersey followed in 1799 and 1804, respectively. While these northern states did not rely on slave labor for their agriculture, their economies were still tied to the exports from southern states, and they did not refuse that inexpensive cotton made available by slave labor. So yes, they were reading and believing in the same story, but from the comfort of their own homes. And none of them saw their own families sold down the river for profit. So obviously, I don't mean to equate the abolitionists' outrage at slavery to that of the black people who suffered it. That would, of course, be impossible. But one part of Juneteenth is about all the people who believed and acted out the universal, heartfelt story that said powerful people should never enslave others. Their actions were the long prequel to the Juneteenth story, the great and horrific war to end slavery. It was fought and won at a nearly unimaginable cost of suffering. It was fought by both black and white soldiers so that the Americans, the African Americans, the latest version of the Israelites, could hear those glorious words on Juneteenth, 1865, "You are free." It was brought about by what we might call in modern terms a moral fusion. It was a moral fusion of imperfect people who believed in the same story of compassion and justice for everyone. The Reverend William Barber created this term to describe what will it take to free modern-day captives. He is convinced, as was Martin Luther King Jr., that millions of people who face injustice at the hands of modern pharaohs won't win their freedom unless they join together and fight for what is moral. Barber calls everyone who joins in this battle repairers of the breach. It is a name taken from a moving verse in the book of Isaiah, which reads, "Those who set the oppressed free will rebuild their ancient ruins and raise up the foundations of many generations, and they will be called repairers of the breach." Barber is creating the next chapter of the universal story in which those who believe in compassion and justice will stand up to modern forms of slavery. He reminds us that the same forces demonizing immigrants are also attacking low-wage workers. The same politicians denying living wages are also suppressing the vote. The same people who want less of us to vote are also denying the evidence of the climate crisis and refusing to act now. The same people who are willing to destroy the earth are willing to deny tens of millions of Americans access to health care. Barber goes on to say, if black people and white people, brown people and native people come together, they are an unstoppable force for justice. Celebrating Juneteenth is first and foremost a celebration of African Americans enduring and overcoming the great evil of slavery. And now that day, and every Juneteenth, will be a holy day. It will be a holy day when all of us can rededicate ourselves to hastening the arrival of each new long-awaited messenger. Messengers who tell today's people who are captives to poverty and racism and an ailing planet, tell them that it's over. Your long struggle is finally over. You are free. Thank you.
We now turn to our time for generosity. Congregation leaders work diligently throughout the year to be careful and attentive stewards of our congregation and its funds. We depend on their tools and talent to track where every dollar goes through many meetings and lots of paperwork. But the gifts you make to our weekly offering or through your annual pledge represent far more than lines on a spreadsheet. They are a tangible commitment to the vision of the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Flint. Each time you give, you renew that commitment to support all that we believe and all that we do together. In that spirit, we invite you to participate in our offering using the basket at the rear as you leave or online at uuflint.org. All gifts are gratefully accepted.
We shall overcome. When we can truly celebrate the diversity of contributions and talents offered by all people, we shall overcome hatred and prejudice and oppression. When we can truly extend our hands to one another in loving acceptance, we shall overcome the past that haunts us. Living in peace and freedom, we shall overcome the wrongs that have happened and the debts left unpaid. We shall overcome.
And let us extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. We didn't get that song properly attributed. That was, of course, Stevie Wonder. Thanks, Dan. I didn't get it in the bulletin properly, but we can take a minute to talk about the service if you like, or you can also go ahead and move down to coffee hour, which